Hi, everybody. We will get started now. Thank you all for coming. A quick note before we begin. We're getting a little crowded here, which is fine. If you relocate yourself upstairs, there are how many cookies? Dozens of cookies. Dozens of cookies in the bleacher seating if you would like to relocate yourself and have a better view. Thank you all for coming. Tonight's lecture is maybe the fourth or fifth of the semester. And it's customary for us to invite the individuals who come to teach a visiting critic studio during the semester to also give a public lecture. So tonight we will hear from Erik Herrmann and Ashley Bigham. Together they run a practice called Outpost Office, which is based in Columbus, Ohio, but more commonly does work elsewhere and all over the world. Just a bit of maybe factual information. Erik and Ashley, as I mentioned, have a practice based in Columbus, Ohio. They are both tenured associate professors at Ohio State. They also both taught at the University of Michigan. Both graduated from Yale University about a decade ago. And both studied at the University of Tennessee, where they earned their undergraduate degree. Like many others, around my age and theirs and older, they got into teaching pretty shortly after they graduated from school. And I think that set them off on a particular trajectory that gets us to where we are today and affords them some of the accolades that they've earned over the years. So they've been invited to participate in some of the things that people that set themselves off on that trajectory hope to do, participating in things like the Chicago Biennale, earning recognition from the Architects newspaper, from Architect magazine, from the ACSA, and have been featured in a lot of the other venues where people that do the type of work that they do hope to be featured. All of this is to say, I think that they're making a pretty significant contribution to academic discourse, and just now, maybe more recently, starting to think about how a lot of their conceptual endeavors manifest physically in the built world, mostly temporary, but probably soon in a more permanent way. What I most admire about what they do is think about how their work has or can make an appeal to different types of audiences. So even in their biography, I think they use the word projective, which to me means something very specific. I think it means that they're conscious of the ways in which their work intersects with other things happening in contemporary architectural discourse, but also out in the world. They're conscious of the way in which their work intersects with culture, with society, and maybe for me, more personal interest is the way they participate in conversations around form and aesthetics and shape and geometry and color and composition. And I think of that work as being very expertly developed. And to a trained eye, which many in this room have, it's doing something very intentional with things that are very simple, like shape and color. Well, things aren't simple, I guess, with shape and color and aesthetics and composition. So you'll see it in the work that they present tonight across different scales, that there are things like the one on the screen behind us that I think make an appeal to many different types of audiences. So I think of the work that they do as having an appeal to those who have not been trained in architectural design, that don't have the terminology at their disposal to kind of describe with precision the things that they're drawn to, that catch their attention visually, spatially, etc. But at the same time, the work that they're doing, I think, is very expertly developed, using those terms very specifically to put themselves in dialogue with others invested in advancing the discourse of similar topics of interest. So we will see a lot of bright and shiny and colorful and active objects today, and I think they're as disciplined as they are accessible to the general public, which I think is a very strong feature of their work. I'll stop there. I'll turn it over to Erik and Ashley. They will speak for about 45, 50 minutes, and then there will be a chance for questions from any of you. So again, thank you all for coming. Let's welcome Erik and Ashley.
Hi, I'm Erik. I'm Ashley.
I just want to say we really appreciate the strong welcome that we've gotten here since we started as some of the VCs, the term we finally learned. And we've really enjoyed working with the students as well. So thank you, Kyle, for the introduction. Thank you for the team that put this together. Never really lectured in an atrium, but this is quite beautiful. I also know there's a really good turnout, and I think a picture has circulated of us. The dog is not here. So if you're here for the bulldog, you can leave and no judgment, but maybe she'll make an appearance at some point.
Thanks. And also thank you to the students, our students personally that we've had here at Syracuse for a few weeks. We've loved getting to know you. But also all the other students. I know this is midterm week, so you either had a midterm today or tomorrow or Tuesday or something. So we really appreciate everybody coming out, and we're thrilled to have friends and students here. So in our work, what is Outpost Office? In our work, we are exploring formal and organizational alternatives to permanence and accumulation in architecture. We focus on provisional, temporary, and open-ended environments that are mutable in nuanced timelines. To do so, we work in all dimensions and across many mediums, from furniture environments to ephemera connecting cultural histories with environmental measurement, and also to apps reconsidering patterns of development in the exurbs. And like all architects, we love making drawings, very disciplined drawings, as Kyle alluded to, sometimes very long drawings, sometimes really big drawings. So in short, Outpost Office is a practice about everything architectural and about everything extra architectural.
So I'm going to start off kind of talking about a bit of a framing that I think is not only like a way that we've been reflecting on our work recently, but also a little bit aspirational in terms of what Kyle was talking about as the firm transitions into more building and firmness. So one thing we've learned in recent years about our work, maybe through this kind of feedback of different audiences, is that broader design culture tolerates the ephemeral, but questions its status as architectural. The firmness of architecture and its potential to endure are often an implicit but dominant form of assessment. So a few years ago, we came across a book, Timefulness, How to Think Like a Geologist Can Help Save the World, from geologist Marcia Bjarnerud. And in the book, she argues that we should all be thinking more like geologists to tackle planetary crises like climate change. And her reasoning is disciplinary. Geology tackles enormous timescales of Earth's history head on. And consequently, geologists reconcile with timescales far beyond the human lifespans and imaginations. So with these vast timescales, nothing is ever fixed or static. Everything is constantly in flux. So taking cues from this provocation, how might we expand the definition of time in architecture? And what would an architecture that is timeful rather than timeless be? Can we define time not as a universal constant, but as an intrinsic architectural medium? And what methods of representation and imagination might be necessary to aid in this transition? So obviously there's a lot of ways that architects work with time already. Things like adaptive reuse is an obviously a kind of timeful practice, but adaptation is a reactive approach. A timeful approach might produce deliberately temporary or cyclical architecture designed to disappear, transform, or reemerge. And as mentioned, we want to frame time in architecture not as a force to be endured, but as a medium to be inhabited. So if adaptation and reuse are about how a building survives over time, then a timeful architecture could be framed around how does architecture express and inhabit time itself. So this suggestion is not a call for temporary architecture, but we're trying to eliminate the false dichotomy between permanent and ephemeral, in many ways trying to understand what spectrums we want to work on. So a timeless architecture passes through time with indifference, but a timeful architecture, whether for seconds or for eons, deploys its impacts across time. Timeful architecture is opportune, seasonal, rhythmic, syncopated, durational, recurrent, and cyclical. So here we have a list of these kind of tenets that we're trying to put together, where we're thinking about how we can adopt a kind of certain measure of polytemporal expertise, an ability to consider time at radically different scales. And so tonight, what we'd like to do is we're going to share some of our work in two discrete, very different timescales. So first, we'll discuss a series of urban installation projects that appropriate the city for temporary acts of architecture. These works are extremely large in scale, but short in their lived duration, although we continue to study their impacts across time. And secondly, we'll discuss a pair of multifamily housing speculations with significantly smaller footprints that explore durations of time measured in the cadence of generations. And in both cases, we're seeking timeful works that are not self-contained architectural acts, but parts of chains of reinterpretation and transformation.
So field marking is a body of our work, and it's a body which is at an architectural scale ephemera. So it mixes the temporary with the architecture scale. And for the past few years, we've been designing this in obsolescence. So these are a series of fleeting supergraphics exploring the spatial potential of mark making. So we call this periodic design. Each installation that we do utilizes a GPS-controlled painting robot to inscribe site-specific building-size drawings at 1-to-1 scale. The drawing employs measuring, delineating, and marking to rehearse architecture as the dynamic performance of spatial instructions. The result is a transient spatial practice assisted by this funny little robot from Denmark, which was designed and intended to stripe sports fields. So it can stripe a sports field in 20 minutes and do it perfectly. We, however, kind of took that robot, began to hack it, and began to really explore the limits of what else we could do with it as architects who like to make drawings. So we also install this work ourselves. It's a part of a proprietary process we've built. So we tend to work less like a traditional architect or a contractor in this method, more like a film crew shooting on location. We experience new challenges like unpredictable environments, the weather, logistical challenges, limited control over the robot, permitting, and regulation. So at the same time, the spontaneity and improvisation of the process makes for a unique extra architectural moment like this, a kind of dance duet between a robot and a contemporary dancer at the Ragdale Foundation. And that's where our work with robotic painting began. For the Ragdale Ring competition in 2020 here at the Ragdale Foundation in Lake Forest, Illinois, just north of Chicago. So the commission was for a temporary performance space, which we situated in a small clearing at the rear of the property, a historic campus designed by arts and craft movement architect Howard Van Doren Shaw. Very familiar to sports faculty in this crowd. They also did an amazing Ragdale Ring. The project brief assumed that architectural teams would come and build a single pavilion, and that would be constructed over a two-week period, and it would last around 3 months. So the course of the entire summer, it would be deconstructed and disposed of at the end of summer. But having recently discovered this world of autonomous sports field marking robots, we proposed a series of monthly drawings instead of a single large-scale installation. So this periodic approach would include 4 discrete robotic painting drawings throughout the summer. Each performance would take place over 2 to 4 days of on-site robotic drawing, 1 night of public performance, and then various minor engagements over the 3 weeks that it would take for the painting to fade completely. Thus, our Ragdale Ring kind of eschewed literal, formal circular forms in favor of another connotation of circular marking, a cyclical and incremental summer-long performance. The vantage and kinetics of the drone drove many of our compositional studies. We realized that the kind of drone footage, they were going to live stream the concerts on their website because this was during COVID, so they had limited in-person audience. And so we realized that here actually the drone view became the primary view, not a kind of secondary view that only the architects would see, but many audience members would actually see this view. So the final design was based on calibration patterns, which are actually used in aerial drone photography. And we grew up with this kind of image of the world as this infinitely scalable series, or maybe we're a little too old for that, but we sort of grew up with it. But seeing the world in this way is very native, and so we wanted to kind of embrace the familiarity of this type of view, actually. Another reason that we became so encouraged by the field marking process is that it bypasses ecological precariousness of temporary architecture. So here there are no disposal costs or construction waste. All of the paint is biodegradable and safe for sun, wind, and growth kind of make it disappear over 3 weeks.
So our next study with painting was part of the, as Kyle mentioned, the Chicago Architecture Biennial. And this project is a bit of a, we imagined it as a kind of pre-occupancy study. So we like to start with this footage because it's kind of a great way to describe the goals of the biennial, which was organized by UIC faculty member David Brown. This was the available city cycle of the biennial, and I think that what David was hoping to do was taking what is usually cited in the cultural center along the kind of skyline there and bring this kind of architectural intelligence out into the city and out into the neighborhoods. So we see this pan down that goes from the iconic Chicago city skyline, follows this Pink Line train, which is an important conduit to our site, which is located there on the left. So our site that we were given by David was an important community hub of North Lawndale, and it was at the intersection of three critical links operating at the scale of city, neighborhood, and block. So for city, we have the Pink Line, which brings people in and out of the neighborhood. We also have Drake Avenue, which is an important neighborhood thoroughfare. But then also there were things that aren't marked on any map, like this pedestrian corridor, which we noticed once we visited the site, which was an important way for people to access a school a few blocks away and slip through without having to walk down the avenue. So Cover the Grid combines graphic features from charts calibrated to ensure specific aesthetic performances, things like color charts, calibration patterns, things that we saw in the last project, and templates for calibrating for specific bodily performances, so courts of all shapes and sizes. So we didn't invent any of the graphics that are in this exercise, but our expertise lies in arranging and recombining them in new landscapes of measure. Now, we had a very specific reason for using these color charts and this kind of work, is that we wanted to create an installation that would be a kind of first step, a pre-occupancy study, a kind of prototype for the community to occupy, test, and manipulate. What's important to understand about our work in North Lawndale is that the neighborhood was already using the park we were using. And our charge was not to start anything there or end it, but to be a kind of bridge to the place's future. So whatever we designed, we wanted to have hallmarks of being provisional and temporary. So this is a site with an incredibly dynamic history, and we're not a beginning or a concluding act. And so we wanted to share some images also, because I think sometimes the drone footage makes things look rather effortless, but these are intense material practices. There's gallons and gallons and gallons of paint installed on the site. So a lot of the graphics came from results from student-led workshops where we learned a little bit about the infrastructure that was there and also what the students wanted. So things like basketball courts, hopscotch, foursquare, and a crosswalk through the site that we identified a little bit earlier. And obviously these building scale notations are reminiscent of supergraphics work of many figures that we admire, like Mary Ann Rumney or Barbara Stoffaker Solomon, Charles Moore, Denise Scott Brown, and Venturi. But in this case, the robotic graphics of Cover the Grid operate less as illegible signage and more as intense chromatic fields. It's also a very low impact installation method, so we never had to close the park. Basically, this is a kind of pickup game that's occurring a few hours after the park was painted. And unlike working out in a big field like at Ragdale, we're kind of dodging an incredible amount of infrastructure, some of it which shows up on maps and some which does not. The photographer Alex Ava did a lot of photography for us as various events started to pop up. And we love these moments where this kind of intense, hyper abstract graphic, which for us was about calibration, it was about tapping into this kind of existing crosswalk, suddenly became the kind of platform for line dancing and other movement. The other thing that we really enjoyed about working with this project is the question of like, how can we make drawings, back to maybe Kyle's point about audiences, how can we make things that are normally unhelpful for people really helpful? Plans can be straightforward for architects, but not for everyone. So we found plans drawn in situ at 1-to-1 scale can be a really transformative communication tool standing on top of the surface. And the space became a way to kind of negotiate how the space would be used in the future. We also did a thermal study of the site when we were finished, and we had a scan done where we discovered that there was a 14-degree difference between the warmest and coolest parts of the surface. This has led to kind of some work in the office around atmospheric and environmental consequences of painting, thinking about how we can orchestrate maybe non-visual effects within these paintings. And as we mentioned, this painting was designed for obsolescence. It's gone now. It's only really on Google Earth. Because the community has come in and they repaved the surface and put in a brand new park. And what's lovely about that is we weren't involved in designing the park in any way, but there are small little traces of our work There's little spots of pink. There's certain gestures and certain effects that were kept. But many, many, many things were consciously discarded. And it was really amazing to see that transformation. So we know that you guys heard from Javier last week, who runs Concentrico. So we have a fair number of projects to show, so we're going to go through this really briefly. But this is our project for Concentrico in Logroño, Spain, where we installed an installation we called Public Utilities, which was inspired by modest utility markings on construction job sites. So Public Utilities activated multiple spaces. This is one of the spaces. This is Plaza Primero de Mayo, and 2 area schools with inscriptions that suggest new programs and patterns of use for an existing public space. So working at multiple scales, these public instructions suggest new organizations and pathways, but their precise use is open to civic interpretation. And so it was really wonderful to watch people activate and use this notation. The different radii were occupied by things like bikes, scooters, and passersby. And it was also really nice to work on this project because it existed kind of outside the city center in a place where there was a lot more of a kind of daily use and ritual of the space by people that were kind of residents or lived just above it. And at its core, it's part of an ongoing investigation to civic potential of notation.
So as our work with robotic painting continues, and we've also begun considering timeful dimensions in our other work, in our work of firmness or our built work. And so the next project we're going to show is a kind of transition project where we did a field painting there. It was the first slide that we showed, and it'll be our last slide. We did a field painting at Wexner to kind of do a short-term duration project there, but then we also kind of transitioned that into several pieces of furniture that we did that would have a longer lifespan. So we were lucky to work with one institution and one site and do 2 different formats of timeful projects. So here, this is one of the original Peter Eisman drawings, the construction drawings, I guess, of the Wexner Center. So it's on the campus of Ohio State University. It's situated between the city, which is on the right, and the campus, which is on the left. And it's the Wexner Center for the Arts, designed by Peter Eisman with landscapes by Lori Olin. And it serves really as the front door, or this kind of hinge point between the city and the campus, which was a big part of Eisman's original intention in the design as well, is to manifest that. So in 2023, we were commissioned by the Wexner Center to construct a temporary pavilion on the Art Center's campus. So the curator's ambition was to blur the lines between inside and outside, activating pockets of leftover or awkward wedges of space that resulted from the iconic geometry. And also they really wanted to kind of break down the barriers of entering an art museum. They found that many students and visitors to Columbus were intimidated by a prestigious art museum, and they really wanted to make sure everyone felt welcoming. So while the exhibition curator initially envisioned a single pavilion to activate the grounds, of course, we proposed something else, which was a series of 4 smaller mobile structures, increasing the likelihood that their lifespan would extend beyond the exhibition's duration, which was originally only meant to be 6 months, and it ended up going on for 2 years. But by making their transport to new locations more likely. So they stayed 2 years at Wexner and now have actually moved to different locations. But each structure would identify a space that needed or could sustain a kind of insert. But whatever we wanted to do, it was going to need to move, and this reflected also the Wex as an institution. So the Wexner Center for the Arts is a non-collecting contemporary art museum, which is quite rare. So they don't have a permanent collection of any type. They only have traveling exhibitions. So everything is always new and fresh, but also movable and temporary as a museum. So the installations rely on this global complex, unceasing kind of circulation of artifacts. We really wanted to tap into that aesthetically. So we were looking for inspirations, and we saw that in things like sawhorses or easels, scaffolds, both high and lowbrow examples. And also when you work at the Wexner, you have to think about the ground. The ground is slopes. It has a lot going on above it, below it. There are lots of things that most of the kind of public lobby is actually beneath the ground at the WEX. So knowing that pieces would move in and around the interior and exterior, we couldn't take kind of flat ground for granted. We were going to have things outside and inside. So we were interested in objects and situations precipitating from precarious, askewed, mismatched, or conflicted relationships with the ground. So color block number 2, which is the name of the project, borrows the formal features of other precarious art objects like temporary frames, props, crates, and scaffolding. It uses a grammar of parts with cues toward instability, temporarily propping, precarious placements, and uncanny scale. So each furniture element seems appropriately sited, but is more relaxed or indeliberate within its posture or scale. So working closely with an engineer, we developed kind of simple physics sketches to explore these clunky form finding. But technically, the elements had some challenges. They could not be anchored to the ground, as the plaza serves as the roof for the film center below. We were mentioning the precarity of the ground is a real thing, but they also needed to be robust enough to endure climbing or other sort of student late night shenanigans that might happen on a college campus. Here's some study models where we were really looking also at form and color. I think this is one of the first projects where our notions of color became very challenged. And this is something we're obviously teaching right now here at Syracuse and working on with our students, is that we found that any kind of digital drawings or renderings that we were doing of color were not actually allowing us to really explore actual materials. And so model making, which has always been a big part of our practice, here we kind of ramped up model making as much as we could. I think the first week or two of design, we were doing an artist residency, so we had a lot of time, and we were making, I think we made about 100 models that first week. But it was probably one of the most fun weeks of the office that we've ever had, just kind of time to explore. But all of these things we found we really had to test color combinations, materials, effects in the physical world. This also kind of later transitioned into full-scale construction, working with professional fabricators, but kind of checking in and making modifications and things as we go. So the structure and the form also led into color specification. So we had to specify the colors in a more detailed way. We would never make construction drawings with color, but obviously here we really had to figure out how to do that, how to notate that, and how to transfer and kind of work between RAL system, latex paint, and vinyl appliques, each kind of with their own color specifications. Each system does not correlate to the other system, so really have to be careful if we wanted things to match or things to not match. Again, sometimes we would have particular digital effects, like the kind of glow of the lime green on a screen that we would try to emulate in real life with some success and finding colors that would help that lime green appear to glow even though it was not a fluorescent paint. So we actually didn't use specifically fluorescent paints at all. Those fade when you put them outside. And again, these had to be robust enough to endure sun, wind, rain, inside or outside. Here's two of the units installed. So there were 4 locations around the WEX. 2 were interior here in the main kind of lobby. So there's an upper public lobby and a lower public lobby, as I mentioned before. And these are the only moments where you can kind of be at one unit and sort of get a sneak peek of another unit. But for the most part, they're kind of these discrete objects that appear as you walk through the museum, as you begin to kind of experience and right before you move into the galleries. So it kind of misbehaves with its context. Obviously, there are angles, there are geometries, there are ideas, of course, from the building itself. And it was also a challenge to work in that building itself. It's obviously a very iconic building, and so putting anything in that is, you can't ignore the context in that situation. There's also, they were not controlled galleries. These were public spaces where they often show art, but they do have kind of light streaming in. They're not as controlled, and so we really had to, kind of work, but also embrace things like working with the curtain wall in the background, or the famous kind of hanging column and beam situation. this replaced some very awkward chairs that were there, and also kind of, again, has these relationships to the columns and beams in the background. The Wexner Center also has they struggle to alert people to where the front door is. They kind of have two primary entrances, neither of which are easily identifiable by new visitors. And so this sat right where one of the new, or one of the existing front doors was, as a big kind of emblem. The final piece here, which is the kind of most interesting, my personal favorite aspect of the Wexner Center, is just this whispering wall, which is right above there's an auditorium below. This beautiful whispering wall that actually directs and faces out onto the oval, which is OSU's main quad. And so it really directs back to the campus. Almost you can't kind of comprehend or understand the city is right behind you in this image. But I really loved this kind of whispering wall, which people were not using very much, and we wanted to have a way for people to kind of pause and be there. Also here, thinking about the color red, which, given the brick and the existing conditions of the Wexner, this piece kind of really was attuned to work with the background of gray concrete, but also the specific kind of red. So we want to close with our kind of second, let's say, body of work. Which will probably be shorter, but very different timelines. So now we're going to kind of look at the other extreme, a kind of timeline of generation. So these are projects where we're exploring questions of timefulness measured in generations. You'll also notice these are more traditional buildings, and as Kyle said, we have a couple of buildings under construction at the moment, none of which we'll see tonight. We'll save those for next time. But that is, the other kind of extreme and end of what we are working on at Outpost Office. So a lot of these next two projects come from the idea of the single family, or kind of interrogating the single family. So in America, legal and zoning definitions promote the single family home as an economic instrument, prioritizing home equity over social equity, collective access, or even individual desires. Think about how many times has someone renovated their home, not for their own enjoyment or dwelling, but instead anticipating an improved resale value at an undisclosed future date, like as an investment, seeing architecture as a financial investment rather than a space to live. So the home as a financial instrument to create generational wealth in America is actually quite particular to the US. It's protected by political leaders and financial institutions since the 1930s through mortgage and tax incentives. And these policies have historically marginalized and discriminated based on race and gender. And more of this kind of research and interest in housing was published here in Mass Context 33, Vigilantism. So it's the foundation for these several of our research projects. So we think that this legal, economic, and political preservation of the single-family home in America hinders and stifles imagination of alternatives. And so that's what we are interested in doing, the imagination of new typologies for housing. So this project, A Long House, is not a discrete building design. It's actually a flexible prototype to densify suburban and urban and ex-urban locales. So a long house's crumpled form can adapt to the enigmatic demands of various site conditions, so differently sized sites. The geometry destabilizes normal notions of boundary, offering semi-detached living spaces, flexible surplus space. I love this wrinkle in it. It's like it's coming into being in real time. But also variable unit sizes make a long house ideal for multi-generational living, work for home, shared spaces, all of those kinds of, and I know many Syracuse faculty are also interested in working on these housing issues, as are many architects right now in the US. And so we really enjoy being kind of a part of this peer group of people who are trying to at least offer the architectural imagination to overcome some of these problems. So this alternating pattern between open and closed spaces on the floor plan creates a flexible framework for delineating dwelling units of various sizes, programs, and profiles. The service cabinets ensure that exterior massing does not reflect the interior configuration, defying conventional registration of ownership and separation that characterizes modern attached housing.
So whereas in the bottom it's a little bit more kind of subdivided into individual units, the upper amplifies the spatial entanglements and connections between units with large open spaces for shared resources such as home offices or childcare spaces. So these span across multiple units. And the prototype's constructive ambiguity provides idiosyncratic spatial affordances with a highly articulated, obviously, geometry. So the dominant gesture of the house is its long, continuous, undulating roof. So here you can see how that undulating roof carries over kind of shared porches, which are the lighter purple areas, over the kind of more private units, which are the dark blue, and then over those kind of shared collective attic spaces, which are in light. The exaggerated gable provides a pragmatic shelter, but predominantly serves as the unifying image for the house, drawing together the entire complex and ensuring the community literally lives, literally and figuratively, under one roof. And so here you can see in this worm's eye, again, like this subdivision Ashley was talking about, the partitioning of the individual units is on a kind of modular system. So we would imagine that at times bars could be split, but at other times you could start to kind of conflate them together. We're always interested in this kind of, this generic fabric that we can make as specific as possible. And here you can see that in this animation, the study again of the long figure, which I think reads more clearly as a kind of collective. And then you have the in-between conditions as these things squeeze together and these little snippets, these moments of kind of houseness pop out of it. And we like that the project occupies that in-between. There are many, many solutions on both sides. So the longhouse elevation kind of reveals this inherent tension that we're after. So for a recent exhibition, we were setting up 2 large prototype models. So each model is flat packed, ready to assemble for easy transport and rapid assembly. But the project was developed right before COVID hit. And so we had the gallery in Los Angeles that was going to show the work, and suddenly that venue wasn't available. So we made 2 decisions that we really came to kind of inform future ways of thinking about showing our work. The first one is that we put the model on display, but we put it on display in Columbus, where we're at. And instead of trying to show it at the Wexner or a museum, we showed it in an empty storefront in downtown Columbus, because Columbus has a surplus, like many cities, of commercial space, but it doesn't have enough residential. So we took this speculative space, this kind of classic, and these 5/1s, right? This kind of space of speculation, and we planted the model inside it. We were actually the developer was very nice and gave us the space. The hardest part was getting the insurance worked out through Ohio State. And then they rushed the model out of this space. And just to make a point on exactly what I'm talking about in terms of real estate speculation, this storefront is still empty. So this was like 4 years ago, right? But the model kind of seems at home in the space. And it became a kind of provocation for other models of collective, which is what that apartment building claims to be doing. And we like it in this kind of unfinished shell. The next thing we did is we took the budget that was going to go towards shipping, and we decided to make an app. There was an online exhibition, and we were interested in creating something that would expand the notion of drawing in the practice. So we've showed you very long drawings, we've showed you very big drawings. This is a drawing tool. It still works. You can use it on your phone, which took a lot of work, so please log into it. And then you can take a screenshot and you can send us your long house, which we love to see. But what the app does is that it's a kind of point of emphasis on the fact that the project, as Ashley mentioned when we introduced it, is not a specific prototype, but a kind of spatial system, right? And so it does hold the user a little bit at arm's length. There's only so many solutions you can produce from it. But we've been really delighted to see the results that people create when they create their own long houses. And it's a way to take the space of the drawing and the space of speculation and also the algorithm that we're using to create this and turn it into kind of a little bit of a pedagogical tool as people try to produce their own figures. So we're gonna close with one of our most recent projects, and this is a project for a house and a house and a house and a half house in Los Angeles. So as you've seen, our practice conducts a significant amount of experimental work, but we are deeply committed to building and making. And so in this instance, we're exploring possibilities for building fabric that can expand and contract based on changing needs. This is something we had started exploring in the Longhouse, and we're particularly interested here in dimensions of chosen families and multi-generational living. So the project was a response to the Small Lots, Big Impacts initiative organized by City Lab at UCLA. City Lab, of course, was the group that put together work on ADUs, which have been adopted in other places. And this particular competition was organized around another piece of legislation that they're trying to put together to kind of look again at patterns of density. So this is a housing prototype that's suited to the family, as the previous project was as well. But again, trying to think about what that means in dimensions, not only of familial relations, but the questions of chosen families, but also questions of it as a financial instrument and something that has to do with ownership. So the project's situated on a specific site in LA, but this is just to demonstrate its suitability to the brief. We imagine this is a kind of continuous fabric that could be sited on similar lots. In fact, what drew us to do the competition is that this lot is the same exact size as most of the lots in Columbus, where we might actually be able to build something like this. So the legislation allows for the subdivision of existing lots legally. So of course you can densify them with duplex and triplexes, but this is a way of actually splitting it into multiple lots. What's helpful about that is that it introduces not only different methods for producing density, but also allows for the possibility of completely different ownership models. So you can lease the land and build something, you can own part of the land, you can own part of the building, et cetera. So in our particular case, this lot was slated to have 1,700 square foot primary residences on up to 3 lots out of the existing lot and a junior ADU. So in the arrangement illustrated here, which is our response, this includes a primary residence on each of the new lots and a parcel which also includes a junior ADU at the back of the lot. So this is a layout that shows you a series of courtyards, which we'll talk about briefly, but also the three main units. The ADU is actually the darker blue, so it looks bigger here, but it's got a smaller footprint, and then the access points. So the resulting building fabric offers maximum access to air and light and exterior spaces, much more than the traditional neighbors. There's no room in the house that doesn't have air and light from at least 2 directions. But it also produces a kind of gentle massing as you're introducing all this kind of density. As a collection of spaces, the project doesn't just prescribe private or communal life. It's embedded with the possibilities of both, offering agency to users seeking to share new habits in domestic settings. And in terms of timefulness or the dimensions of the project, this is really it. It's a very simple diagram. The idea that over time the units could be combined or split off in a number of different ways to allow this kind of fabric to appropriately accommodate groups of all sizes. But again, as I said, different ownership models as well. So you could own the whole thing and lease parts of it. You could have all kinds of different models. So some diagrams here to describe the layout. There's 2 party walls that are constructed, and then the gentle slope of the path that's green along the edge of the site provides access to the 2 units in the back. There's a circulation spine that runs all the way through the project. That spine is something that you can either open or close, like a kind of valve, to begin to connect one unit to the other. And in terms of the proposal, we're also trying to think about, of course, modular construction. We did not design this for any specific construction system, but we tried to lay it out in such a way that you could build it with almost anything, given the challenges of sourcing different materials at the moment. So it can be constructed with traditional framing or block, but what's important here in this diagram is the bathrooms and stairs are consolidated into cores, which can easily be prefabricated or just make standardization a little bit easier to bring onto the site. Kitchens are included for efficiency and easy installations as needs shift and change. And the scheme prioritizes, as I mentioned before, air and light. We're really trying to lean on everything we can do passively and creates a series of private and shared terraces. So you can see here that what we're really interested in is all these figures, all these kind of incredible in-between spaces that might be possible. So here in the plan, you can see that central circulation I was talking about. We're illustrating it with doors and steps because the site terraces down. But the idea is you can close or open those kind of like valves. So that hallway makes its way through, but also becomes part of each of the spaces, something in between a kind of enfilade and hallway. And you can see here the basic layout of the units with that kind of modular sensibility to the interior, as I mentioned. And this is up above, where we have bedrooms as well, and access to the terraces. So part of thinking about how this could be flexible is kind of anticipating future uses. So we laid everything out based on kind of worst case scenarios for retrofitting the spaces. So for example, in the second unit here, we have a kind of large kitchen, but let's say that down the line, that unit needed to be converted for having an ADA accessible bathroom. Everything is sized so you could slip that in very easily. Or something like the kitchen actually is redundant if you combine the junior ADU and the last unit here, so that could be converted to a work from home office. But everything is designed in such a way to, again, allow it to have very specific kind of moments, but also something that can grow and contract very easily. And here's an image of it terracing down to the end of the site. Because we're teaching color here, I should mention the use of the color. We're really interested in these stripes because we're trying to look at the way in which we can entangle the question of, is this one unit or several? And so we were looking at colors that could work together that would allow us to distinguish but also combine. So obviously there's a kind of interlacing that's happening. You see that the light bands of gray tie two units together, but then the different bands of other colors separate them. We're also interested in kind of confusing the reading. So for example, the darker gray becomes the shadow of the lighter gray, beginning to kind of challenge what belongs to what part as you view it as an entire collection. And it terraces its way down the site, but actually at the front of the site, it has quite a modest profile because of this terracing, but also the way we kind of produces a split level change. And then on this side, you can see the interior of the front unit, this kind of kitchen space, where we're really trying to show the kind of incredible porosity to the scheme and the way you would kind of feel open and light despite the fact that it's quite dense. So here you can see the figure ground and the way that it reads kind of completely differently from obviously the kind of serialization of units that lie at the front. And again, this is the kind of icon of the project and really an icon of a lot of this, this type of work we've been doing. So there is the possibility that there's a convergence in these bodies of work. We have some plans for that, but it's kind of another story. So thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you both. We have time for questions. Would anybody like to lead off the conversation with a question? Sure.
What is the square foot cost?
Square foot cost?
Too much. Anywhere?
Let's take a medium-sized city, Columbus.
Yeah, we haven't gotten it priced fully out, but I think we're hoping it can. I don't. Yeah.
I mean, it's a great question. I think that to be honest, we haven't had it priced, but I would say that one of the things that we did when we approached the competition, which is why it's so different than the Longhouse, is that we really were focusing on something that would be very buildable. So it doesn't have any kind of large spans. It has a pretty logical layout. The windows aren't that oversized. So there are several things that we've kind of cooked into the design that would hopefully produce a price that is be something we could do. But I would say that, I mean, this is one of the challenges, is because the competition is having a second phase where they're asking for RFQs and we're putting together teams, right? And it's possible maybe to do something like this in Columbus, but very, very challenging in Los Angeles because it would just take such an incredible upfront investment. But it's also things like the site choice. So that site is sloped, which would be much more expensive to build on. So any developer we would have a team with will want us to design it for a flat site, right? Because most of the cost you're looking at right now would be going underground.
Got another question back here. Use the mic so it gets picked up for transcribing.
Thank you. I had a question about your, well, two questions actually, if that's okay. Okay, I had a question about your last project. You mentioned how it has, its design sort of anticipates future uses, and I was wondering if you could like explain that a little more, go into that too.
Yeah. So I mean, the last couple projects we were showing. So the housing. Are you talking about the housing? Yeah. I mean, I think at this point, like it's pretty well documented what those future uses will probably be. I mean, we also like to obviously design things in a way that's like flexible and can be anything, but it really can't be anything. So usually we try to imagine a scenario, right? Like a work from home scenario is obviously very common today, like a kind of with children, without children, very common, like a lot more people of a similar age, like people of different generations. I think just thinking of some of those parameters, let's say, we kind of come up with scenarios in our mind just to test. I think what we learned, like, a long time ago doing kind of things that are flexible or malleable is that you can't just kind of have open free-for-all space. I think it's actually like very intentionally designed. I think the best example is probably what Eric was showing about, like, does an accessible bathroom, is it the same square footage as a kitchen, for example, in that project? And I think once you find those alignments, then it's actually like pretty interesting to think about in what scenario would you want to switch out one for the other. In that way, you could also kind of reverse, like, imagining who might live there. Because again, I think in the research that I've done on this, the quote unquote nuclear family is actually the minority of families and households in America. So majority of households in America are not two parents with two children or even two parents with one child. That's the minority of households. So I think then it's like, oh, actually it just kind of frees you up to think about the majority is not being designed for, I think, quite as much.
Did you have a second question?
Yeah, what was the second question?
You can yell it.
Yeah, I'll repeat it.
I mean, no, it's a good question. I mean, I think it certainly has its limits, right? And so, and I think that's what we're trying to get at in these two projects is like being generic isn't general. You have to be really specific to design in a generic way. And so I think that like it's a precursor project to this latest one. And at the time, what that speculation was about was like, can we create a kind of hyper generic fabric, but then like stretch it to be able to be specific in other moments, right? Because what struck us was that we like the balance between spaces that are for privacy and spaces that are for like communal use where maybe the boundaries are a little slipperier. And so for the longhouse, what happens is that no matter what configuration you create, the bedrooms and most of the kind of primary spaces of the project are always the same. It's actually the porches that get really specific. And sometimes they're inside courtyards, sometimes they're shared between two units, sometimes they're at the end and they're just by themselves. And the porches are spaces where there's a little bit more ambiguity about whether you're inside or out, and a little bit more ambiguity about who owns what. If two units face it, it's a collective porch in some way. And that would have to be negotiated. And for us, that's interesting because it produces for us a kind of way of formulating a project where we're able to kind of balance between these two different types of spaces that interest us. So that's what the exercise was. And then as a fallout, it could fit on some parcels and others it would not work. It's not a kind of universal housing proposal. I would say that the kind of lots we were looking at were in kind of rural areas that are getting densified, usually with kind of tract housing that looks like suburbs. And oftentimes when you're doing farming, there are leftover geometries that are awkward, right? Because machinery can't turn around or they like choose to use the land in a very specific way. And it's kind of suited to squeeze and come into those spaces. Unfortunately, until we get the square footage number down or find an interesting investor, there are no longhouses on the horizon. But that was the spirit of its flexibility.
Thank you so much for the presentation. As a second year student, we are extremely scared by color sometimes and how you go about this into your design language. I noticed that a lot of the structures that you presented are some sort of massing with then a facade or color applied to the outside. I was wondering how you integrate this into your process? Do you think about it throughout the entire time, or is it something that sort of resolves in the end?
I think we've approached different projects different ways. I will say the VC studio that we're teaching here, we titled it Color First because of that exact question. Like, when do you start to think about color? We wanted to push our students to think about it first. Because we knew that they had never been asked to do that in a design studio. We were never asked to do that in a design studio when we were students. So I think we for much of our career had the same hesitation or uncertainty about it. And I think it was just through practice and finding joy and enjoyment in working with color that we are now more comfortable, or at least excited about it. I think form has always been something, form and geometry have always been really integral to our practice. And I think at some point we actually realized you can't, what's the thing you always say about a box? You can't imagine a colorless box. Like, even if it's a white box or a black box, like that's a particular type of box you're imagining. And so I think we wanted to embrace that. And I think I think also we've done, several kind of artist residencies where we've been talking to a lot more painters and other sculptors, installation artists, other artists, film, fashion, these are things that inspire us. And I think it's sometimes, again, we feel like we can't incorporate what they're doing into architecture, but there's really no reason that we can't. So I think that, start small. You don't need to make the quote unquote most colorful project, as we've been telling our students. Beige is a beautiful color, gray is a beautiful color, black and white are, something in their own right. Like, start small and work up. Check with your professor first.
Hi guys, thank you. That was really interesting. I had a question about the temporary art installations you talked about in the beginning. So from my understanding, ephemeral works tend to rely on like a certain aspect of surprise and discovery for the viewer. So I guess I just wanted to know that how in a world where digital systems are guiding our experiences more and more, how do you as designers preserve that kind of unplanned encounter or like serendipity of it? And even further than that, once a project is complete, how do you evaluate the success of it in relation to the public's interaction with it?
It's my turn. It's a very good question. I don't know if I'll get to every part of it, but I'll try to scratch out some stuff. So I'm really glad you mentioned serendipity, because I think that Ashley mentioned when we work on the projects, like this one, right? We feel less like a kind of architects or contractors and more like a kind of film crew, right? But film crews take different shapes. Like, there's filming like a major Hollywood production, or there's filming something like a kind of street film. And those are very different approaches. We like the serendipity, but it's challenging with the robot because everything you're seeing here is programmed. So, and it has to be programmed ahead of time. So in this case, we scanned the site. We did a high resolution scan, and then we mapped our geometry to it. And what was also particularly challenging about this site is that the robot is super dumb, like really dumb. It doesn't have any sensing on it. It's dumber than a Roomba. Like, if you're in the way, it will hit you. And all it has is a rubber gasket that's like a kill switch when it runs into something. And so you have to draw where the robot moves, but also it's like jazz. You have to draw where it's not, right? You have to draw when it's just moving. So in this case, we're trying to produce something that feels very spontaneous, but it's highly planned, right? And takes an incredible amount of coordination. I would say that we are trying, though, to think more and more about how we can begin to give the robot like a series of rules, and then the outcomes will be dependent upon the site that we're at. And we did a little bit of a study on this with Brandon Clifford from MIT. We're looking on doing a series of drawings where basically we would draw the same drawing in numerous different places, but because of science, magnetic north is different in different places. And so there would be a little spontaneity into how the robot draws, because it would like lose its way one place and lose its way differently at another location. So I'm glad you mentioned it because I think we want the spirit of that spontaneity. So the only thing that really is spontaneous is the way people use them. And that you see here, this is why we started using these curves, which for some people, they saw it as images and they were like, oh, you're in your like Baroque period. Like, you're not doing like just straight lines and geometry anymore. But the reason we did them is because we found that they were a way that started to guide people's movement. Like it's universal. Like once you put down these paths, people start following them like they're a kind of track, right? And you can use them to kind of orchestrate movement on the site and create new perceptions and ideas about the site. So I would say that in terms of spontaneity, we spent more and more time trying to learn from how people used the previous exhibition, how to design the next one. So this actually is a kind of new version of something we did at Art Oh My, which is a park in upstate New York. And then it was evolved for this site. And it's exactly what you're talking about, though. We're interested in orchestrating movement on the site much more than we're interested in an image. The drone images are very nice, and they're a nice way to explain the project, but what really matters is the way people use them.
I'm going to ask the last question, and then if anyone else would like to ask, I'm sure Eric and Ashley would be happy to stay around a little bit more and ask. I was a little bit surprised by the way that you guys presented the work, in the sense that a lot of the declarations you made about decisions within the project were tied to like a practical consideration or a contextual affiliation that you wanted to draw, and therefore like everything kind of had an alibi. But I also know that there's a lot of things that you guys are doing that have nothing to do with site and have nothing to do with practical concerns. And the question will really ask you to unpack that a little more, but there's things that are consistent across projects. So there's always parts, there's never wholes. There's always disorder, there's never order. There's always like complexity within simplicity, meaning like there's never like complex three-dimensional expression, but there's complex figuration within, let's say, a primitive volume. And I think those things are tied to the moment at which you're developing conceptual projects, and also, I think, appropriately acknowledge limitations that come with cost and site response. So I think that's what I was hinting at in the beginning, like they're double-coded and they're kind of doubly responsible. But I was wondering if you could talk about, I'll just ask this in a very unfair way, like why does the work look the way it looks if you can't use like program, site response, or practical matters for justification?
It's your turn.
How do you ever judge success of it? I mean, that's it's maybe not frustration, but I want to answer your your question. Yeah, I mean, we're absolutely, definitely to more extent, interested in the things. Those are the conversations we have with each other. And so it may be also just in a way when you are, you could say it both ways. Like when you give a lecture, let's say, do you have that conversation, or do you have this conversation, which is, let's say, easier for audiences of all levels to grasp, right? And I think like we used to do that first conversation. More and more, we're doing the second conversation publicly and the first conversation at dinner. Yeah, I don't want to say privately. It's not. We have it with our students. We have it with our peers. But it is maybe not always the best way to kind of communicate the broad message to like a broader audience, like meeting people where they're at. Obviously here it's a room of architecture students and architecture professors mostly, but we also, again, we always want architecture to be quite accessible for all people. And so I think that's one way. Now there may be other reasons, but I think, yeah, those are the conversations. And maybe it's also that it's not that we have a firm answer on that, because I think our formal language is like very particularly our formal language, and it's influenced by people in this room and people all over America, right? Or all over the world, probably. It's influenced by art. It's influenced by all of those things. I mean, maybe when we were showing that kind of GIF of scaffolds and crates and like Eric's desktop, basically. Like those are the firm inspiration images. When we like sit down to do a project, we run through 100 images that have nothing to do with site or context or budget. They're simply aesthetic images, and they have something to do with geometry and, and then I think we're obviously, as a practice that's looking to build things, whether they're pieces of furniture or buildings, I think we sometimes say that's one reason we started working with color. White paint is the same cost as purple paint. So it literally cost us no more in a budget to make color an active participant in the way that you read the form. And I think that was something that kind of drew us to color, which was like, okay, this is not going to impact our budget, but this is going to make our form appear more complex than it is, or appear more round when it's actually not, or appear more like a part, more like a whole. We were actually able to kind of influence the way that geometry presented itself by using color in a way that didn't require intense or expensive fabrication techniques.
No, we'll answer it at dinner. But I also think like it's this kind of thing where the work is, I don't know, like sometimes I feel like a lot of that stuff is self-evident in the work, and I sometimes bore myself by saying it out loud, to be honest. So the work is the way we're working through a series of problems that are very specific. And I'd rather talk about ways in which the work aspires to do that out in the world than talk about the magic tricks we're trying to do. But it's a good question, and it also does speak to the way we've transitioned how we talk about it, for sure. Yeah, and it's something that we're still trying to work out.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I as much as I'm surprised about how things were presented, I do think it was also very accessible and gives a way into the project for any audience. But I was also thinking about, I played substitute teacher today in first year, and I was asking them like how they make decisions about what they're designing, because they don't have a site, they don't have a program, they barely have scale. And like there is a way to be objective and develop something like a composition expertly when you're interested in things like rhythm and proportion and legibility. And I think there is, yes, you could have given that lecture too, for sure. But I think there is as much intention and expertise and depth in the things that maybe to you guys are self-evident, because of course you've been working on them forever, but they're also the things that make your work disciplinary and not just like, responsive to market and context and demand. And I think it's also like wonderful for students to see the images that they saw today and also just think about those things as having qualities that are expertly developed outside of, let's say, a justification or an alibi that's tied to something extra architectural, to use a phrase that I also use. So yeah, I can be sympathetic to that, but I think the strongest aspect of the work is that it can hit at multiple levels and across different audiences, and there's as much kind of like nuanced architectural reference as there is kind of appreciation of the everyday and the banal and the off the shelf, which again, I just think makes the work smart. So we will conclude by thanking you, and then again, if anyone would like to ask an additional question, I'm sure they'd be happy to entertain that. So thank you all very much for your talk.